Well, I guess it's time to start Sabbath school. And in light of starting Sabbath school, let's have prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for this Sabbath day. Thank you for this lesson on education. Thank you for this lesson this week in education about the Sabbath itself, which we are in at the moment. Please bless us as we spend time on the Sabbath, on the concept and thinking about it, that we might gain some wisdom and draw close to you, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. A few weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and I had a reason to want to write a poem, and for whatever reason, a poem came to mind, and so I wrote it out, and some of you may have seen it if you were on our GMI communications, but it was on the Sabbath day. I thought that was kind of fitting. And then I shared it with Dio, and he went and wrote music for it. That's this one. And then, of course, Alan got a hold of it, and he wasn't talking with Dio. He was doing his own thing, so he wrote this version of it with different music entirely. And so now all of a sudden I'm helping write music, which I didn't really expect, but that's the way it worked out. And so I'll read it to you. It goes like this. O Sabbath day, I like you best. A lovely time in which to rest. From daily stress and cares of life, you shield us from a world of strife. O Sabbath day, you lift the load. We carry down life's weary road and hold it for us just today, so we can sing and laugh and pray. O Sabbath day at week's long end, those cherished hours with God we spend. His love and grace, they fill our hearts. Oh, from us may they never part. Kind of a cute poem. And of course, then I've got the music now, which was kind of fun. Now Alan's been after me to sing it, and my schedule has been very stubborn and rebelling against that notion for reasons I can't quite explain, but that's the way it is. Anyway, so the lesson this week is on the Sabbath. Sabbath afternoon, it tells us we have a memory text. It says in Mark 2, 27 and 28, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath. What is Jesus saying there? Do you have any thoughts on what Jesus meant? We know that I'm sorry, go ahead. Could you grab the microphone? You can turn that microphone around if you want. It won't hurt my feelings. Doesn't sound like it. Okay, well.
According to the verse, it's saying that the Sabbath was not just given to the Jewish. It says here that it was made for man, so that means it includes every single person in this world. And that he made it not to be a burden, he made it for us to be a blessing.
Sure. Now the history of this situation was what? The disciples or someone was doing something on the Sabbath day that wasn't approved, and Jesus was commenting that no, it is approved. We can't. I don't remember if it was the disciples or if that was a day when there was a healing. We could probably go look there. Let's see, Mark. View more. Mark 2:27. No, that's not going to help. All right. But in any case, there was some question as to whether the behavior on the Sabbath was appropriate. Don't remember if that was eating some corn in the field or whether that was the man that was healed. It was that one? Okay. And so he's saying the Sabbath was made for man. And as you're pointing out, that sounds like mankind as opposed to Jewish people. And not man for the Sabbath. Yes, sir. Let's move this over so that you don't have to walk all the way around it to get to it.
Good. Where does conflict come from? Satan is the source of all the conflict. And I've lost part of my thought here, but we can be kinder. The title of our lesson refers to the character of God, living the character of God. Someone said that the combination of thoughts, words, and actions constitutes our character. So in our lesson today, we can take the thought, words, and actions that we find in the Bible.
Jody, it says in the commentary, was the only Seventh-day Adventist in her graduate program, and her choice was not to attend some social events on Sabbath meeting, which would make her beliefs very visible. One day, one of her friends, Gail, called her. Gail's husband was going to be out of town for 6 weeks, and she asked Jody if she wanted to spend the next 6 Friday nights with her because she knew Jody did nothing on those evenings anyway. And so for the next 4 Friday nights, they ate together, played music, shared their Christian experiences, and generally enjoyed each other's company. The 5th weekend, Gail told Jody that she had been downtown shopping and looked at her watch. Oh good, she thought, Sabbath is very soon. She suddenly realized that over the 4 Friday nights she had experienced something new in her Christian experience. She had grown, learned more of her God, and deepened her faith. Sabbath had been an opportunity for education and personal development. It is an interesting story about how we can think of the Sabbath as not just a day for rest, but as a means of education as well. Have you thought too much about Sabbath being a day of education? Have you put some thought to that? Well, I like getting out a book and reading it on spiritual matters on the Sabbath, and although I guess I don't think of it as continued education, it's probably educational, isn't it? Sunday's lesson starts off with, have you ever wondered why God chose to give us 2 harmonious creation accounts in the first 2 chapters of Genesis? Some people come to the conclusion it's 2 separate stories, but it's the same story, we believe. Genesis 1 recounts the creation week and the growing wonder of the earth as it is given form and life, culminating in the in the creation of man and woman on the 6th day. Genesis 2 looks at the same account, but from a different perspective, with a special focus on the 6th day. Adam is at the center of the picture now, and everything is described as being there for him and the woman, the garden, the rivers, and the animals. So creation is too deep for one single account. First, we learn of the powerful artistic creator who has an eye for perfect beauty, and then we meet the God of relationships who wants humanity to love and care for each other and the rest of creation. So it asks us to read through Genesis 1 and 2, the creation account, and reflect on how the first Sabbath links back to the first creation story and forward to the second creation account. So the first creation account is about God bringing it all together in grandeur and glory, and the second is a little more focused on the relationship side of Adam and Eve. Do you have any thoughts on that? Anyone have something to share? Sure, go ahead.
So these 2 things were given to us at the very beginning of this world. And so to me, it's clear that just when God laid the foundation of this world, he also laid the foundation of the 10 Commandments and also of marriage. Meaning to me that there is no playground, there's no change here. These things are immoral, as to say, that we cannot bargain with. It's something God put as his foundation for all of humankind.
Yes, sir.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
And as you just said, the whole thing is an expression of love to one another and love to God as He works with us.
And in a certain sort of way, isn't the Sabbath day a testament to the truthfulness of the first and second books of Genesis, in that we have the Sabbath day, we have the seventh day, we've always had a seventh day. There's never been a time in history where there wasn't a seventh day, and yet the very existence of the seventh day points to the Creator who put it into motion, and is one of the biggest arguments for the creation account, because we've never ceased to have a Sabbath day since the day that it was created and rested the first time. Something, you brought up the Ten Commandments. We frequently, every time I read someone talking about the Ten Commandments, we kind of couch it in the first four are our obligation to God, and the last six are our obligation to mankind. Well, they are, but the Sabbath commandment is both. I mean, God in the fourth commandment spends more time talking about the effect of the Sabbath day on our friends and neighbors and families and servants and animals than it spends on the keeping part. I mean, remember it to keep it holy, but then it goes into the big long line of 6 days shalt thou labor, do all thy work, 7 days for thy son, thy daughter, thy manservant, thy maidservant, the ox, the ass, the stranger that's within thy gates. And the reason is because God created within 6 days and rested on the seventh. But it's also the reason that all of those different components of society have a need and a desire for the blessing of rest. And so the fourth commandment isn't just about obeying God. The fourth commandment is about recognizing the needs of our fellow human beings, in that we can't work them 7 days a week and have a clear conscience. We need to give the lady that is the cashier at the store, or the waitress at the restaurant, or the hairdresser, or whoever it is, the person going through the fast food line at the restaurant, or the fast food or wherever, we have an obligation to those people to give them a day off. And so the fourth commandment isn't just about obeying God. The fourth commandment is like the height of honor to our fellow human beings, that they deserve their day off as well.
Can I change one word in what you had there? You speak about obligation, but really should think of opportunity.
So the first creation accounts link back to the first creation story. Imagine yourself as Adam and Eve on that first Sabbath. It's your first day alive, your first day with your spouse, and your first day with God. What a day of education. Imagine how much Adam and Eve learned, in one day, all of a sudden taking it all in must have been overwhelming. You start to learn of the God who created such beauty. You marvel as you see an elephant one moment and a frog the next, each unique. You smile as you see the antics of the giraffe or the buffalo. I think back to last weekend. I had friends come to visit for the weekend. It was nice. I had family in town. And one of my visitors brought her 2 German shepherds. Now they're rescue dogs, so they're really shy, and they don't say much. But it was neat on 2 or 3 occasions throughout the weekend that they felt comfortable enough to play. And so they were, scooting around my living room. Good thing it's not a small place. For 2 German shepherds racing around the couch in the living room, playing. And imagine that in, the animals having a great time, just being silly, and enjoying that time. And anyway, so we're silent in awe of the many colors and shapes, enraptured by the symphony of sounds, reveling in the range of delights and taste and smells, and exploring the delights of different textures. I spent a couple of days with a different friend of mine a while back. We took a drive in the countryside. You know, I drive from one place to another to get there. And it was an interesting experience because she said, I want to drive. You need to sit in the driver's seat. I said, why? She said, because I want you to see the fall colors. I don't look at the fall colors. It never even occurs to me. I just want to get from one place to another. No, you want to sit there and look at these colors. They're really great. And so for my ride to church that morning, I'm looking around and, well, sure enough, the colors are pretty neat. I mean, it's not my forte, but it was kind of an interesting perspective to think about, you know, taking note of what God had done with the fall colors. For my friend, it was just an amazing spectacle of grandeur and wonderment. And for me, it wasn't quite so exciting, but it was neat to kind of take in a little bit of her wonderment at the same time. I think I learned a little bit about maybe paying more attention to the beauty that God's created. She pointed out to me that each blade of grass is shouting out how much God loves us. And that's a lot of chorus if you look at the average lawn. I mean, you know, you just go out and look at your lawn and say, well, that one's a shout of God at me, and that one, and my goodness, that's a never-ending sign, isn't it? Most of all, you start learning about relationships. Can you imagine Adam and Eve waking up, you know, Sabbath morning, brand spanking new, everything is completely new, and just the wonderment of that. They must have been majestic creatures in and of themselves, certainly, and I mean, there's just an awful lot of wonderment there. Most of all, you start learning about relationships, responsibility, caring, love, and you experience it with your Creator. You start to practice it with the rest of the created world. The first Sabbath could not have been a passive experience for Adam and Eve. It was a God-created opportunity for them to focus on their Creator and the created. It was a time for them to be astonished. So can you think of any educational opportunities that Adam and Eve had during the first Sabbath? I mean, they're just waking up to a new world entirely. Do you have any thoughts about their educational experience on that first Sabbath? Well, we've certainly covered most of them, I think, anyway. But imagine what they must have been thinking about the other person. They haven't had time to really get to know each other. They've got a lot of hope and expectation and curiosity at that point. I can't imagine being any different. And I can't imagine what it would be like to see my world for the first time. It must be pretty amazing. I have a friend that just got out of prison, being in prison for over 17 years. And the world has changed. 17 years. He's doing a pretty good job of coping with it, so far that I can tell. But he's experiencing a lot of new things. I mean, he did have emails and similar to text messages and phone calls and things, interactions, but the world is not the same place he left in Tennessee 17 years ago. And so I imagine Adam and Eve had quite a lot of wonderment. Monday's lesson is talking about time for rediscovery. When Moses is asked to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, it is clear that the masses have lost their perspective as children of God. They need to rediscover who the God is who asks for their worship and gives them so many promises of an amazing future. The Sabbath is a pivotal learning experience in their journey of rediscovery. It also becomes a clear signal to other nations of the special relationship between God and this nation. The experience of the manna epitomizes God's way of educating the Israelites. So it goes to Exodus 16:14 to 29. And it talks about the manna. And when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there was a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, it is manna. Yeah, what is it? For they didn't know what it was. And Moses said unto them, this is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. Gathered every man according to his eating. And then let's see. It came to pass that on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses, and he said to them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which ye will bake today, and seethe, which is cook, that which ye will cook, or seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to keep until the morning. So you can have it cooked, you can have it baked, or you can eat it plain. You get all kinds of variety. And they laid it up till morning, as Moses bade, and it didn't stink, as in days past, neither were there any worms therein. And Moses said, eat that today, for today is the Sabbath unto the Lord. Today ye shall not find it in the field. 6 days ye shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is the Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And some people decided to test God on that matter and went looking for some Sabbath morning. And Moses was a little upset with them and said, how long refuse ye to keep the commandments of my commandments and my laws? Well, no, that was what the Lord said to Moses. The Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse? So see for that the Lord hath given up you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Everyone should abide in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So what can we learn from that experience?
Well, one of the things I see here is how God was very patient with them, and just so they would never forget the detail of his explicit command of not going out to gather anything on Sabbath. I loved how God also taught them temperance at the same time, because everything that went overnight would spoil on a regular day, but yet on Friday it didn't spoil. And so it's the same for us. You know, there's a special blessing for me on the Sabbath day, that the things that we gather up on the Sabbath, like education-wise, I think God puts a special blessing that we will never forget the things that we learn on that day.
Any other thoughts on manna? All right. God provides the miracle of the manna for the Israelites, giving them just enough food for each day. Have you ever had one of those experiences? Or a time period where, you know, things are tight, but for some odd reason, you have enough? I thought it was neat. I was in Belize a few years ago, and Shaw and Kati are a family there, and their 2 children. I got to spend some nice treasured time in their home. I had some meals with them and got to share with them a little bit, they with me. And Kati, she had an interesting story. She said, you know, when we lived in town, when we weren't Adventists, when we were just, you know, doing our best going along, Shaw, well, that's their last name, but that's the name the husband goes by, Shaw had a good job. I mean, he was making good money for a day laborer sort of a person in Belize. He had a good job. He was making good money, and so they had their own home, and things were fine, except she said, we never quite had enough economically. And that's a continuous trend. It's well known that the average person worldwide, United States, wherever, if you ask them how much more they could use in order to feel like they had enough, it's about 10% of what they're getting would be the addition they'd like to have just to be able to meet, which means that's probably about 10% that they're spending of their income over time, over above their income, that their debt is rising, most likely, and they'd have their debts paid off and be okay then, or maybe they could save a little. But Kati said, she says, neat, because we got to know the people that moved. We started going to church with them and getting to know the staff, and we decided we wanted to become, to do this full time. So we moved out of our house in town, and we rented it out. And we came to move, and we were living in housing here. We get a little bit of a stipend, and we're not making nearly what we were making. And yet the neat thing is, as we get to the end of our month or the end of our week, and we have enough. And if there's something that comes up, there's enough for that to deal with it too. I mean, it's just the way it works. And so it's kind of neat that God was teaching the Israelites, you trust in me, you get to Sabbath morning, you're going to have enough to eat. You got to trust me. Every day he performed a miracle for them, and they saw God's care. And on the Sabbath, however, the situation was different, just as the day was to be special. Now 2 miracles were performed, double food on Friday, and the food did not spoil overnight. That left the Sabbath for the Israelites to marvel at the God who was their deliverer and to rediscover what it meant to be the people of God. The Israelites were to eat this manna for 40 years. God instructs Moses to keep an omer of the manna to remind the Israelites of how he fed them in the wilderness. It says in Exodus 16, and it also would have been a reminder of the particular experience of the Sabbath day. There are also other occasions when God makes clear to the Israelites that the Sabbath is special. And of course, there's many other places throughout the Bible that comes up as well. The Sabbath was a way God helped the Israelites rediscover their identity and their God. They were asked to obey and keep the Sabbath holy, but this was in the context of developing a deeper understanding of the character of their Creator and about building a lasting relationship of promise. Why did God want to clear away the normal daily routine from the Sabbath and make it something different, something special for them? What was the motivation?
I don't think I was ever a workaholic, but people can get so wrapped up in the daily routine. We need the Sabbath to call us back to God.
One of the most common complaints that men on the planet hear is, you're never home. And of course, there's plenty of reasons why that can be. Maybe he's just so focused on his work that he doesn't realize how important home is. Maybe the way he treats his family creates an environment where he feels like being elsewhere because, maybe there's relationship issues. But nonetheless, there is a challenge to us men to spend the time we need to with our families. There's a challenge to us men to set boundaries for us and our homes for how busy we allow ourselves to get, and the Sabbath is one way of either succeeding in spending time with family or failing at it. When I was growing up, I really didn't notice too much difference between the work days and Sabbath. Not that they weren't different, not that we weren't doing different things, but because my father was equally unavailable on Sabbath as he was the rest of the week. My father was a passionate literature evangelist. Nothing he liked more than knocking on doors and sharing Christ with people. And second in line to sharing Christ with people was going to churches and telling them how cool it was to be a literature evangelist. And so for a number of years, my brother and I got to enjoy an awful lot of different kinds of food at many different kinds of potlucks throughout the Midwest. But the Sabbath would have been a little more enjoyable if it would have been cordoned off for family a little more deliberately. And so we men especially, in setting boundaries for our homes, want to be aware of that. The lesson at the end of Monday has a question for us. You're talking to a teenager who is finding Sabbath boring. He is keeping it only because that is what the Bible and his parents say he must do. What suggestions will you give to him to rediscover the Sabbath as a positive learning experience? We have some young people in our room. I'm not sure if you're teens or 20s now, but you've kind of been through that. You got any suggestions or thoughts related to Sabbath and growing up, or Sabbath and being a young person?
Well, that's one thing that I really appreciate about my parents, is that they always took the time on Sabbath to always do something in the afternoon with us growing up, or, we would always have a special meal on Friday nights together. And that was always a real privilege growing up.
So you enjoyed your Sabbath experience?
Yeah.
That's a blessing. That is, yes, ma'am.
I don't think that we can really enjoy Sabbath the way it is supposed to be unless we have a relationship with the Lord, because it will be boring for adults or children if that relationship is not there. And I think with children, their relationship is developing. And so I agree with what the young man was saying. Parents need to be extremely proactive about providing an interesting Sabbath experience. And you're basically holding them by the hand until they develop that relationship with the Lord themselves. And then I remember when I first came to the church, and I did think Sabbath was very, very long. And it was difficult, but after the relationship develops, we look forward to it. So if we don't know this person, this being that we are supposed to be spending our time with and enjoying and being blessed by, it can be pretty empty. So it's a growth.
Sure. Tuesday's lesson, time for learning priorities. The ups and downs of Israel's experience with God were closely linked to the way they related to the Sabbath. God saw their unwillingness to respect the Sabbath as a sign of his irrelevance in their lives, which we could read about in Jeremiah 17:19-27. I'm just curious what that's about. Then thus said the Lord God unto me, Go and stand in the gate of the children of the people, where the kings of the Judah come in, and by the which they go out, and say unto them, Hear ye the word of the Lord, ye kings of Judah, and all the inhabitants. Thus saith the Lord, Take heed to yourselves, and bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gate of Jerusalem. Neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, neither do ye any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath, as I commanded your fathers. But they obeyed not, neither inclined their ear, but made their neck stiff, that they might not hear nor receive instruction. And it came to pass, if ye diligently hearken unto me, saith the Lord, to bring in no burden through the gates of the city on the Sabbath day, but hallow the Sabbath day to do no work therein, then shall there enter into the gates of this city kings and princesses, sitting upon the throne of David, riding in chariots and on horses, they and their princes, the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and this city shall remain forever. Well, that's quite a statement. This Sabbath behavior stuff is really important. I mean, if you just close the gates on Sabbath and honor me like I asked you to, you're going to be paid homage by the elite of the entire planet. I mean, you don't get much more elite than the king's coming to visit. And that was in Jeremiah's day. That was long after Solomon making these promises. And yet, I mean, we just couldn't get there. Imagine if the children of Israel would have taken that to heart in Jeremiah's day, what kind of a welcome Jesus would have gotten instead. It would have been kind of an interesting change of direction. So how does that relate to us today? What he said in Jeremiah about, one, the problem of not keeping the Sabbath properly, and two, the blessing of keeping it properly. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Or any experiences in that?
We're keeping the Sabbath holy. It is, I recall 6 years ago, I was growing up in a country, 5 of us children. So during the week, we are all working, our parents, so in the country, and duty, eat kind of food that we have to rush to go back to work.
So you had a busy week with lots of cares and worries.
Mostly told. So when Friday comes, we already start to relax. But after 3, 4 o'clock, we did everything. Our parents said, okay, it is ready for bath. We used to take a bath once a week. So we're so happy. We have a new clothes. Everybody was very nice. And we are going Friday night to church.
Okay, now the people online can't hear you, so I need to at least say what you're saying, or I need you to go to the microphone. But he's saying that when they got to Friday afternoon, their week started to relax. They knew the Sabbath was coming.
Yeah.
And changes in their lifestyle happened on that day. What was that?
Well, we are so happy because we already suddenly we become we have a new behavior. We are clean.
You didn't take a bath all week long, but Friday afternoon you all got to get clean and put on clean
Of course,
clothes.
we are bath in that wooden tubs. They
Sure.
were that thing. And my mom was boiling in a big tank of water with a big soap like that. The soap was going dry and but yet there was waiting for us a clean cloth for us.
Yeah?
Winter, summer, whatever. And we go to church Friday night, and everybody smiled, everybody kind of different thing. The food was different, and we started singing. So my father was a director of the singing choir there in the country, and we sing, and all the neighbor was jealous for us. They was keep working during Sabbath morning. We are going to church, and they were still doing the work,
Sure.
And we were clean, nice, one after the other, we were walking to the church. So I think it's amazing when I go back and think in my mind, whoa, what a time was that, comparing with today. So, and everybody was embracing, kissing. Well, it was beautiful. I'm talking about 67 years ago back in
Sure.
Romania. It was beautiful. Yeah.
In Romania, yes.
Sabbath was beautiful. The food was tasting different. The day was, we don't want to go so fast because we are studying, we are singing, all in the neighborhood. And my father had a good voice, and all 5 of us also follow him in singing. And then,
So you'd walk to church singing, and the neighborhood had to cope with that. In the meantime, the neighborhood is working on Sabbath morning, and so they're feeling like you're doing different than they are.
Exactly, yeah. So they knew, we are telling them so. But, they were tradition, where they were these Catholics, and they were keeping their tradition, and
Sure.
they had the big pig waiting to be, sacrificed for the Thanksgiving and stuff. And,
Sure.
So we are eating healthy, we have gardening, we have bees and everything. We are healthier, and yeah, even my father said he reached up to 90 years, and all his bodies were going 50, 60, they're gone, and he was praising God for that, because we have this healthy style, eating healthier. So that's another blessing as well.
So your parents made Sabbath a special event for you kids by just changing up the routine in a way that felt good. And part of that routine was getting a good bath and putting on some clean clothes, which was a once-a-week event. And then you got to have a different food Friday night and Sabbath, maybe a little bit, that was a little nicer than what you'd been suffering through during the week, because there wasn't a lot to choose from. And then the neighbors are impacted because you're walking to church Sabbath morning and you're singing, and your dad had a good voice, so they had no choice but to hear him. And so it was quite a witness. And it was a witness to the children because they could see parents standing up for what they believed in and being courageous about that. And the young people enjoying the change in direction for the day and feeling good about the Sabbath. That's neat. If we go on to Tuesday's lesson, while we were on Tuesday's lesson, the ups and downs of Israel's experience with God were closely linked to the way they related to the Sabbath. We read about it in Jeremiah. A renewed commitment to the Sabbath also was part of restoration, a signal that priorities were right. Isaiah 58 pictures an interesting contrast. It says in Isaiah 58, "Cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgressions, and the house of Jacob their sins. Yet they seek me daily, and delight to know my ways, as a nation that did righteousness, and forsook not the ordinance of their God. They ask of me the ordinances of justice. They take delight in approaching to God. Wherefore have we fasted, say they, and thou seest not? Wherefore have we afflicted our souls, and thou takest no knowledge? Behold, in the day of your fast ye find pleasure, and exact all of your labors. Behold, ye fast for strife and debate, and to smite in the fist with the fist of wickedness. Ye shall not fast as ye do this day, to make your voice to be heard on high." So they thought they were doing it right. They were coming to God on Sabbath and saying, we're doing it. Here's Sabbath, and we're worshiping, and we're coming to you, and we're doing all the things we're supposed to do. And he's saying, well, wait a minute, there's something missing. Is not this the fast that I have chosen, to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, that ye break every yoke? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house, when thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide thyself not from thine own flesh? In other words, don't be at odds with your mother and your father and your brothers and sisters. You can't stay away from them. You got to build those relationships back up if they're falling apart. And Sabbath is a day for doing that. Yes, sir.
Try it. The question is asked here, what is God trying to tell us? Remember the story how that the Samaritans didn't please James and John. They said to Jesus, "Shall we call down fire and burn them up?" And he told them, "You don't know what you're talking about." So I think that this whole Isaiah 58 gives us a little insight into the character of God, asking us to chart a kinder course. Sometimes there's a harsh criticism of Catholics. We mustn't do that. They're not our enemy. The devil is the enemy. And we need to cut a little slack, give people a chance to see a better way.
At the end of that section, Isaiah 58 says, "If you turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord honorable, and shalt honor him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thine own pleasures, nor speaking thine own words." Where might that be going? They were keeping the Sabbath day. To their knowledge they were. And yet he was saying, well, yeah, but you got all kinds of society problems you're not dealing with. And furthermore, when you get to the Sabbath day, you're doing your own thing. Do you have any thoughts on any of that? If we were going to educate someone about Sabbath, what would we want to say? How do I know what it is appropriate to do on the Sabbath that's my own, not my own thinking that I want to do? How do I develop the right relationship to Sabbath so that I'm doing what He wants me to do? How does that work?
For me too. I think we could examine and listen to our own conversation on Sabbath, the kind of things we talk about, the kind of things we share.
I had a friend once, made me really self-conscious when I like to chat, I like to talk, I like to share about my life experience, and I explain about the people in my life to people sometimes and help people understand what life is about for me, and ordinary conversation seemed like to me, but I was amazed in talking with this one friend of mine how many times he would stop me and say, that particular line of thought isn't very uplifting. That particular thought is leading towards criticizing someone, or maybe putting them in a light that isn't quite as bright as God would do if He was doing the talking. It was really eye-opening to me to be with a fellow that was truly sensitive to insensitivity. And what I didn't realize was careless conversation. It's difficult because, okay, I'm a manager. Sometimes I need to tell my boss how things are going. Sometimes I need to talk with co-managers about people we're working with. And yet, sometimes I wonder whether I do that in the most uplifting fashion. I need to be honest. I can't tell my boss that this person is performing well when they're not. But how often does conjecture get into the conversation? It was really sobering, and I don't like to spend time thinking about those things too much, but on the other hand, how is our conversation on the Sabbath? What do we allow? You're hanging out with family, you're hanging out with friends, and you talk about stuff. And another thing that bugs me, that I just come to mind, is just simply maybe not even Sabbath events, but just when we get together. My family loves to get together for a good board game, and the game of choice is aggravation. My uncle has been making aggravation boards for the last 50 years at least in his carpentry shop, and everybody in the family has one, and I'm not saying aggravation is a bad thing, but I notice that we get together once a week for aggravation, but we don't get together once a week to read and pray together. We kid ourselves about the scoundrels we are and landing on each other's pieces and sending them home, but we don't talk about our spiritual lives. And, you know, I've raised that subject, and I kind of get a blank stare because I'm raising a subject that isn't comfortable. Well, I mean, what does Paul say about what we should be doing when we get together? Or so the other Bible writers, we should be singing, and we should be praising God, we should have glorious thoughts in our minds and sharing those things and letting people know how appreciative we are for what God's doing and uplifting people that are in sad conditions and doing things to bless others. And in my one social event for the week, if I'm in that part of the country, is to go play a board game, and that's it. And so I just, between what we say and what we do and how we spend our time, I think certainly the Sabbath day is a good day to start focusing on what really is meaningful to do and what really is meaningful to say, and be more mindful, because I get away from it sometimes. Is that our final bell, John, or is that our next to final bell? We got 5 more minutes. Does anyone have any thoughts about Sabbath they'd like to share? Something uplifting or something thoughtful?
I had a friend of mine at the other church we used to go to, and he would never stay for potluck. And so I asked him one Sabbath, I said, well, why don't you stay for potluck? Him and his wife would always leave. And I'd like, why don't you stay for potluck? And he said, well, it's hard to stay for potluck because the conversation always goes the wrong direction. So he wouldn't stay because of the conversation. And that got me thinking about myself. What is my conversation? So often I ask people how their week was, and inevitably that turns toward talking about work.
Right.
You know, and it's, so yeah, I fully see what you're saying, and we need to focus on, you know, Christ and what he's done for us, what he's done for us this past week, you know, and anyhow, I'm just encouraged that we think about our conversation, because it is very important.
One of the ways that Sabbath is protected a little bit better in some cultures is that it's planned. For instance, if you go to Move Ministry in Belize, your whole Sabbath day is taken up. And of course, the whole point of Move is to train missionaries to be missionaries and to do missionary kinds of stuff. And so every Sabbath morning, 4 different vehicles or more of people head out to 4 different churches in different parts of the area and are integral to the worship services going on there. But then they, at least when I was there, we came back on campus and had some lunch, but then we headed right back out and did community visiting, or someone might have put on a program for children somewhere. They were busy doing things affecting their community, and so they were planning how they were going to spend that time as opposed to just kind of letting it float along. And on the one hand, I enjoyed that because it was neat to get to know more people. I met some of the people in the community that were at church. We were back visiting in their community in Sabbath afternoon or maybe during the week, and we got to talk with them and get to know them better. On the other hand, I think there's some value in having a time for a nap if you've just worked yourself all week long a little harder than you should have. A little bit of rest on a Sabbath is fine too. But I think planning it is part of the process, and your young people are saying that because you planned your afternoons, Sabbath afternoons, to have the supplies, whatever it is you needed to do things as a family to make Sabbath afternoon meaningful. Whether that meant that you came to church with your car packed with the stuff for heading to the park afterwards, or whether you had your lunch along, or whether you had it prepared at home, and then whatever it was, you were planning how that was going to go. And I think that's a huge blessing to think in terms of planning ahead for how Sabbath is going to go. And of course, our Romanian friend was saying that the whole weekend was planned there too. The Sabbath afternoon, getting ready for Sabbath, was planned. The evening meal was the best one of all week because it was planned that way. And so I think maybe one of my best takeaways from this lesson is just recognizing that if we want to have meaningful Sabbath, we need to put an effort into it. I think that's a good idea. Well, it looks like my time is up, so it's time for a closing prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for the Sabbath. Thank you that we can think about the Sabbath. We can honestly look at your word and see that there's things we might need to be doing differently or that we could improve upon. And thank you for some ideas, such as planning what Sabbath looks like and making it meaningful to the people in our families, or meaningful to the people in our communities if we're going to go visiting, or if we're going to have some kind of an event to bring them to, or whatever it is we can do that you might lead us to. Please bless us to take Sabbath seriously and make it a blessing not only to ourselves but to those that we care about and that we can be a blessing to. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
One thing we didn't get to touch on, if we invite visitors to Sabbath school, I spent 6 years as a visitor in Sabbath school and learned quite a few things.
Yeah.